Erin Ennis, Senior Vice President at the U.S.-China Business Council from Washington. Great to have you with us. Thank you so much for your time. So we've already seen China cutting back on soybean purchases from the U.S. even without tariffs. So what are your members telling you about doing business in China in this atmosphere?
So definitely there are some difficulties that companies are seeing, and that's why the uncertainty around where things are going with the discussions this week are so important. Companies are hoping that we'll see some solutions to the problems that were accurately identified by the administration, but we're also looking to make sure that the relationship continues moving forward during this process and doesn't get caught up with disagreements.
Now, we are going to get more than 100 companies and industry groups speaking to Congress and lawmakers. What are you expecting to hear about their concerns?
From looking at the list of companies that are going to be testifying at the hearings, it looks like there's going to be up front a lot of companies who do support the tariffs and feel they should move forward. And then a lot of panels of people, including the U.S.-China Business Council, that'll be talking about our support of the issues in the case, but our concerns about the use of tariffs.
So, Erin, on the eve of the delegation from China getting here, we heard over the weekend from President Trump he really wants to fix the ZTE problem. Do we have any sense of whether that is linked in any way, shape, or form to these negotiations?
It's hard to know exactly what it's linked to. I mean, certainly the administration has a variety of issues that's negotiating at any given time with the Chinese. So not just ZTE, but obviously what's going on with North Korea, what's going on these trade issues. So while we don't know if they're directly linked, certainly we would expect to see some outcomes that might deal with a variety of issues beyond trade.
How important would ZTE be to President Xi, for example? I mean, the President of the United States has said that this is part of an overall larger trade deal coming down the pike.
Yeah, our understanding was that some resolution of the ZTE issue was one of the top issues for the Chinese in coming to Washington this week. So I would say it's very important.
Do you expect progress in these talks this week, given the stunning reversal on ZTE?
You know, I would hope that there will be progress. The best that we are looking for out of this is that both sides address what their concerns are and that at least the framework for moving forward on them. Certainly, there seems like there may be some other options under consideration about ZTE. And if that's what's necessary to ensure that the punishment fits the crime for ZTE, to allow us to be able to move forward on some of these other issues, then we'll look forward to seeing what the administration can come up with.
You know, what's really surprising about the administration's stance now on ZTE is that before, when the U.S. was announcing tariffs on steel and aluminum, also tariffs under Section 301, they were supposed to be for national security reasons. So doesn't this go against the president's rationale? What are your members telling you about this?
Well, certainly we've got some concerns about the broad use of national security as a justification for actions not just by the U.S. government, but by the Chinese government as well. There are very specific national security issues that the United States government needs to look at. Whether that's tied to any of these issues, you know, the U.S. government makes an argument. Our companies feel that it probably should be much more narrowly defined to ensure that not only we are allowing business to do their work in an appropriate way, but also that we're not justifying a broad use by other governments of national security as a justification for keeping American companies out of their market.
Erin, it seems like, particularly coming out of the negotiations over in Beijing, there were sort of two separate elements here. One was the trade deficit, which the president has focused on again and again, getting them to buy more stuff from us, on the one hand, and other things such as intellectual property, which are not directly tied to the trade deficit. For your members, if they had to choose between progress on those two fronts, which would be more important to them?
For our companies, the answer clearly is market access and dealing with the intellectual property rights and technology transfer issues. But I will also note the administration also has on its agenda overcapacity issues. That's what's behind the aluminum and steel issues. Each one of these are important. Each one of them has different solutions. So the key here is that both sides need to be looking at ways to define success in addressing each of those problems.
Your members are business people, and business people are pragmatic and practical, realistic. Realistically, what would progress look like after this round of talks?
I would say realistically what progress looks like coming out of this week's discussion is resolution of at least some of the key issues that they will agree to set out a framework of discussion. So does that look like China announcing specific steps that it will take on intellectual property rights or technology transfer, but with the acknowledgement that additional detailed negotiations are going to be needed to not only make progress, but to be able to check in and measure that those benchmarks are being met.
So we always talk about the impacts of tariffs on manufacturers, maybe consumers with higher prices, but we now know that a bulk of Chinese exports come from companies that have foreign investment, that are joint ventures. Do you have any sense of what the indirect impact could be?
It's hard to know right now. I mean, certainly as long as business largely as usual continues, given that we have already had some back and forth on tariffs between the two governments, we've seen only the beginning of it. But I would say what the broader impact is going to be in terms of outcomes of negotiations, but also if the negotiations have no outcomes and tariffs and investment restrictions move forward in the coming weeks, it's going to vary depending on each company, what their position is relative to both investment and inputs from China or their position in the market.
Okay, Erin, thank you so much for joining us today. That's Erin Ennis. She is Senior Vice President at the U.S.-China Business Council down in Washington, D.C.